There was a couple of instances in this game, and there has been this season, where the Leafs have failed to be responsible for their teammates' safety. And this is a common thing that we see with rookies. A rookie comes in, and anytime that rookie is touched, it's a melee. It is a free-for-all, it's a frenzy. You don't touch the rookie. So tell me why this is the third game in a row where Easton Cowan has been thrown to the ice, cross-checked, messed with in some capacity, and there's been no response. Matt Nyes at least tried to do something, but he was already in a headlock. The two defensemen left the ice while Cowan was getting punked. And there was multiple, it was the first game against Detroit where he got cross-checked in the face with 15 seconds left. At that point, there should be a riot on the ice. You've lost that game at that point. It's a free-for-all. There was another play last game where he gets hit, or it was the Nashville game, where he gets thrown into the post. Nothing. And Easton Cowan again gets popped, draws a penalty. Nothing. No response from the Leafs. Now the bigger one is a little bit later. Actually, I'll save this one. There's one play a little bit later where Nick Robertson gets hit headfirst into the boards, and Bobby McMahon does take responsibility, does take exception, and immediately goes over to Tolvanen, starts, wrestling with him and says, "You are not doing that to Nick Robertson. You don't get to do that." He takes a penalty, but that's a necessary penalty in my opinion. The biggest, most egregious instance this season so far, though, has to do with Anthony Stolarz. Now, I don't need to remind any of you that last playoffs, Anthony Stolarz was knocked out of the playoffs by Sam Bennett with an elbow to the head that gave him a concussion. So that right there, that should have been the moment where every Leafs member of the organization said, no one is ever touching our goalie again, because Sam Bennett just did that, got away with it, and it cost us that series. Stolarz was unbelievable in the playoffs, and Sam Bennett single-handedly knocked him out of it and changed that series immediately. To start this season, Stolarz has been getting messed with a little bit. He's been getting bumped a couple of times. It hasn't been egregious, but he's been getting bumped a couple of times. On the third Seattle goal, Brandon Carlo throws Jaden Schwartz into Stolarz. That's not anyone doing anything wrong except for Carlo. There was a play in transition. Mason Marchment going to the net, runs over Anthony Stolarz, and Brandon Carlo just stands there looking down at him as his goalie is laying in the net. And it takes Anthony Stolarz himself getting furious, throwing the net off its moorings, and causing the scrum himself for the Leafs to actually get engaged and take exception to what just happened. Stolarz, your goalie, got run over, and he himself had to be the one to take exception to that. There is no excuse for whatever that was. For whatever every member of the Leafs that was on the ice at that moment, especially Brandon Carlo, who is a huge giant human that did nothing but watch and stands there as his goalie gets run over, and he let his own goalie be the one to stand up for himself instead of taking exception to that. That is despicable behavior by the Leafs to allow other teams to continuously punk them time and time again. And it is absolutely ridiculous that in this day and age, the Leafs need to be reminded that you shouldn't let people hit your goalie. I don't know why they needed to learn that lesson. If they even needed to learn it, you should have learned that against Florida last year. But instead, we are now in game 6 of the season, and Stolarz has been hit for like the 4th time this year. And it took Stolarz being like, enough is enough for the Leafs to give a damn. Absolutely unacceptable from the Toronto Maple Leafs entire team. And honestly, the coaching staff should be drilling them after this game. And like Craig Berube should just give a 5-minute lecture about how soft these guys are being for letting that happen. Could you imagine the Tampa Bay Lightning letting Andrei Vasilevsky get run over? Could you imagine the Vegas Golden Knights letting Adin Hill get run over? And I didn't even want to mention Florida, because you know what would happen if you even breathed on Sergei Bobrovsky in the wrong way. It would be a melee. There'd be no discussion. You would be getting punched and sucker punched and dragged to the ground until you atone for what you did. And yet, whenever it happens to the Leafs, crickets. Nothing. There's no justification for this. And there's a reason that nobody takes the Leafs seriously when they talk about toughness and they talk about standing up for each other. Because when moments like this arise, they don't. They're painfully soft. They're the heaviest team in the league, and no one would be able to guess that. If I didn't know that the Leafs were the heaviest team in the league, you can go walk down the street of Toronto and ask anyone who passes you by, who's the heaviest team in the league? No one's going to say Toronto because they don't play like it. They have all this size. They have all this muscle. They have all this meat. For what? Every single defense pair has a tough guy on it. Jake McCabe, Brandon Carlo, Simone Benoit. At all times, there is someone on the defense that should be ready to jump someone on the other team and just let the fists fly and take exception for something. You have guys like Max Domi who are undersized but will still do it. Bobby McMann was the only, and you know what? Bobby McMann is the only one that gets a pass because he actually stood up for his teammate tonight. Austin Matthews, you don't want him fighting, but you want him to get involved, put a guy in a headlock and say, nope, we're not doing that. Cross-check a guy in the face. I don't care. Get suspended. I don't care. The Leafs need to send the message that you can't do whatever you want against them. You can't push them around. You can't hit guys headfirst into the boards. You can't mess with the rookie. And above all, you cannot let your goalie get hit. You cannot, under no circumstances, let that happen. And I cannot believe that these guys still need to be taught that. And going back to Carlo especially, because he was the biggest offender on that Stolarz play. Brandon Carlo came from Boston. Since when would a former Boston Bruin not stand up for his goalie there? Could you imagine in those series against the Bruins in 2018, 2019, 2024, if the Leafs dared to touch Tuukka Rask or Jeremy Swayman? It's a melee. And you know what? Maybe that's just a culture thing. Maybe the Leafs culture just isn't as good as the Bruins, right? I don't understand how the personnel can change so much. Well, actually, I don't get how the top guys and the guys that set the culture are so soft that it doesn't matter who gets brought into the organization, they immediately become soft. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter if you came from Florida. It doesn't matter if you came from Tampa. It doesn't matter if you came from Boston. When you get to the Leafs organization, suddenly it's just a little different. It's a little bit more relaxed. It's too comfortable. The Leafs are too comfortable. And they need to stop letting other teams get comfortable with messing with them. It's unacceptable, it's despicable, and it is everything you don't want in a hockey team. And it is everything that you don't see in winners. When's the last time a winning organization behaved like this? Because it doesn't happen, because no winning organization acts like this.